Hello, my name is Andrew Steele and my partner is Amy Gill, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a short history of Australia. In this presentation, we're going to be going over a few key events that happened in the history of Australia and how they've shaped the culture and the nation today. Hope you guys enjoy my presentation, and let's get started. So, about 50,000 years ago, the Australian Aborigines arrived in Australia. They were from Africa, and they're known as the first inhabitants of the land. They are comprised of over 500 different groups or tribes, and they spoke 700 different languages. These tribes are spread all across the country, and despite having very different geographic locations, they all held a very spiritual and special value with their lands. It was a big part of their religion. So in 1770, English explorer James Cook first charted the East Coast. At the time, the new territory was going to be used as a penal colony. What a penal colony basically is it's a colony where a country sends their prisoners to either develop the land or serve out their sentence. The first fleet landed in Botany Bay. However, their commander, Arthur Phillip, didn't exactly like the area, so he sailed north to arrive in what is now known as Sydney. He named this new colony Sydney after the British Lord Commander, Lord Sydney. So now that they were in Sydney, many Australians began to establish successful farms and run different livestock and crop areas. This caused for expansions in the area, and many people began to come to Australia when they saw this opportunity. However, this was devastating for the Aborigines and spread illness and caused conflict between the foreigners and the original inhabitants of the land. Like many other countries, the current demographic is very reflective of the founders of Australia. So if you go there right now, you will see a lot of Caucasian people, which is really influenced by the fact that the English were some of the first people to colonize the area. However, as we'll get into later, we'll see that there's a lot of diversity in the land, which was influenced by a lot of different things. So one big reason for the migration into Australia, along with promising farm possibilities, was the gold rush of 1851. The first gold rush began in May of 1851 after prospector Edward Hargreaves claimed to have discovered gold. So these gold rushes changed what was once known as a convict colony into a more progressive city with a bunch of free people. These hopefuls, who were called gold diggers, brought new skills and professions that really contributed to a diverse, surging economy. This really is a big reason for the diversity of the land and was the first big influx of diverse people into the area. Today, we'll see that people from more than 200 countries make up the Australian community, and more than 300 languages are spoken in Australian homes. So, the British governor, Victoria, imposed a mining license on goldfield workers. This led to a violent anti-authoritarian struggle in 1854, which is known as the Eureka Stockade. Although the miners lost the battle, they were granted a lot more rights, and in 1854, a bill was passed that was giving the right to vote to any gold digger who owned a mining license. Many historians coin this as the first piece of democracy in Australia, and this was a big part that has had a big influence on the Australian government today. Australia's six states became a nation under a single constitution on January 1st of 1901. It became an independent nation when the British Parliament passed legislation allowing the six Australian colonies to govern in their own right as a part of the Commonwealth of Australia. This is known as Federation Day and established Australia as a constitutional monarchy. Due to a strong disconnect from the British Empire and for other financial reasons, Australia wished to leave. However, they weren't totally separate from England. Um, yeah, they still had a lot of ties there. And it wasn't until 1986 that they officially ended all ties between the UK and Australia. This is known as the Australian Act of 1986. So during the Second World War, Prime Minister John Curtin reinforced the policy in Australia, saying that, and I quote, "This country shall remain forever the home of the descendants of those people who came here in peace in order to establish in the South Seas an outpost of the British race." However, this white Australian policy really didn't hold up. After the Second World War, the Australian government committed to a vigorous and sustained immigration program. This was enacted in order to meet labor shortages and create prosperity. So from 1945 to 1975, Australia's population almost doubled from 7.5 million to 13 million. In July 1947, the Australian government entered into an agreement with the new International Refugee Organization to settle displaced people from camps in Europe. The Australian government also began to welcome a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe. However, the diversity didn't just stop here. For example, in 1972, 198 Asians who were expelled by Uganda's president Idi Amin were brought to Australia. Also, Chilean people were brought to Australia following a very intense and violent military coup. This rampant immigration helped define Australian culture and shape different professional fields in the country. For example, Harry Seeler, who was an Australian refugee from Nazi Europe, helped define modern architecture in Australia. Australian fashion has been shaped by Chinese silks, Italian suiting, Japanese design, and Indonesian and Indian clothes as well. And these were all contributions made by immigrants. For example, Australia's international standing in medicine reflects the outstanding contributions of its immigrants and refugees. Bernard Katz, a naturalized Australian who was born in Germany, fled to Europe and completed his studies at the Sydney Hospital. This was right before he won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1970. Victor Chang pioneered the modern heart transplant surgery, was born in Shanghai and came to Australia in 1953. So as you can see, the massive amount of diversity and cultural difference in Australia has not only brought them a lot of prosperity in different fields, but it has also led to a very diverse land, which is full of a lot of great people from different areas of the world. So here we can see the comparison between the cultural dimensions of Australia and the culture dimensions of the United States. And I find it really interesting how they are very similar. But if you think about it, it makes sense because both Australia and the United States are countries of immigrants. They have a lot of diversity, and a lot of people from all over the world have fled to these countries for both safety and to start their new lives. So it's really interesting to look at this and see that the reason that we're so such parallels in these different dimensions is because that our countries are founded on immigrants, and the amount of diversity that we have has led to some very similar cultural dimensions.